Howdy doody, folks! Welcome to the second lecture video for Unit 4 on Earth Systems and Resources. Today we're going to be talking about soil. We're going to be spending a few days on soil because it's actually probably one of the most important things on the planet to keep our planet running. There are a lot of great documentaries, I wish I could show you all of them, about why soil is so criminally underrated. We'll talk about what it is, where it comes from, and why you should care about it at all. So, first of all, I want you to understand that soil is alive and dirt is dead, right? Don't call dirt soil. That's very insulting. I take personal offense to that. So, soil is alive. It's a complex micro ecosystem. Dirt is just like compacted sand and gravel. It's just totally lifeless and benign. Whereas soil is it's like a party under your feet. Oh, I get so excited every time I walk around outside because I know what's going on underneath. So a soil is basically the very topmost layer of the Earth's crust, and I say it's alive because it's got all sorts of living creatures in it, right? Not only things like bugs and worms and slugs and things like that, but also lots of bacteria, protists, fungi, etc. All sorts of decomposers. It's really a microcosm, a giant. I would say it's a mini ecosystem, but actually soil covers the whole Earth, so in some ways it's a giant ecosystem. It's also got lots of organic matter in there, decomposing animals and plants. It's got minerals in it, like calcium and potassium, and nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. It's got sediment like clay and sand in there. It's got various gases like nitrogen, water vapor, and oxygen. It's also got various liquids as well, such as water. So it's a very complex, structured ecosystem. And you might be thinking, well, soil's really dumb. Even if it does have all this cool stuff in there, who cares about it, right? It doesn't affect me. I don't care about it. Well, let me tell you, I'm wrong. You'd be wrong about that because there are lots of people who care about soil, and those people probably, I would argue, help make the world go round. Farmers and gardeners, right? And look how happy this guy is, right? He's just so happy to be gardening, and he can only be doing that because he's got such great soil. Meanwhile, these people are putting food on your table, right? So soil plays a pretty important role in providing us with food to eat. And if we don't take care of the soil, we're not going to be able to grow enough food to feed the planet. Not to mention, soil provides a variety of other services, right? It helps promote plant growth, like I was just saying, which is great for us because we grow lots of crops. It also helps cycle nutrients, right? There are nitrogen-fixing bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, all in the soil. It also helps cycle various gases like oxygen and also helps cycle water. And there's also decomposition going on in the soil, which is going to help cycle energy, phosphorus, and carbon. It provides a habitat for a wide variety of species. It gives us something to build on and in. And it also helps store water. Soil can store large amounts of water in the pores between different pieces of sediment. And it also helps filter the water, helps clean out the water when we talked about ecosystem services. So soil is high key, or maybe low key. I'm not really sure anymore. It's pretty important. No cap. All right. And getting back to the farming, any land that can be farmed on, any soil that is farmable, we refer to as arable land. And if you look at this map around the world, you can see that certain areas have more arable land than others, right? And you can see patterns with biomes, right? Things like the tundra are going to have very low amounts of arable land. Biomes like the desert are going to have also low amounts of arable land. Meanwhile, there are a couple countries that haven't really tapped their resources of land yet. India being one of the most noticeable ones because they've seen such a large population boom. So if they really capitalize on the amount of farmable land they've got, they'll actually be able to support their population. So now the question becomes, all right, Mr. P, you've convinced me. Soil is probably the most important thing in my life at any given moment. But where does it come from? And this is a question I get a lot, and I spent many years in college studying it. And it actually goes back a couple millennia back to the origination of soil fairies, which have been present throughout many cultures throughout human history. And it's a lot like the tooth fairy, except they operate mostly within the realm of soil. And what they do is, oh, come on, I hope you know I'm joking. Soil fairies are not a real thing. Soil comes from two different processes. And those two processes result in abiotic components and biotic components. Remember that soil's got non-living things like water and sediment, nutrients. It's got living things in it too. The non-living things come from the weathering of rock, and the living things come often times from the decomposition of dead stuff. Okay, so let's focus first on the abiotic components. The weathering of rock. Weathering is the breakdown of rock over time by wind or water for physical forces. It could be biological. Plant roots can, like you can see in this picture here, the plant roots are breaking up this sidewalk. Lichens can help the formation of soil during primary succession. Their tiny roots can help break up rock, and they can actually secrete acids, which can help break down the rock, although that would be chemical. And burrowing animals can also break up soil and break up rock. And lastly, like I said, chemical weathering can break down rock as gases and liquids react with that rock and start to break it down into smaller pieces. It's important that you understand the difference between weathering and erosion. Weathering is going to break down a rock into smaller pieces. Erosion, whether by wind or rain, is the transport and movement of those smaller pieces from one place to another. Right? So weathering is the breakdown of rock. Erosion is the movement of those broken down pieces to another location, usually downhill and usually into some body of water. And erosion can be really, really bad for soil. Whoops. As we talked about in class with the Dust Bowl, if you lose vegetation in an area because you're over farming, or maybe you slash and burn that area, you deforest it, there are no longer roots holding the soil together, and that's going to make the soil much more prone to erosion via wind, where the top layer, all those nutrients in the top layer of soil are going to get ripped away by the wind, and that can lead to the formation of deserts, which is what we saw happening in the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. This can happen for a lot of reasons. Like I said, if you slash and burn an area or deforest an area, if your cows are overgrazing and they eat up all the grass, if you overfarm an area, if your tractors and your cows are compacting the soil and killing all the grass, if there's drought, if there's increased erosion, etc., all of these things can lead to desertification and soil erosion. And we see this interesting feedback loop where the more erosion there is, the harder it is for plants to grow there. And so you will lose more plants. And the more plants you lose, the more erosion there is. And the more erosion there is, the more plants you lose. So we see this positive feedback loop of soil degradation and erosion. And if you look at maps of soil around the world, right, although India has very high amounts of arable land, a lot of that land has been degraded. Right? And if we look at the United States, the areas where the Dust Bowl was, you can see is also very degraded. So there are a few areas in the world that don't have degraded soil to some extent, right? This light yellow is the only places where the soil isn't slightly degraded. So we need to do what we can to protect our soils. And we'll talk more about that in Unit 5 when we talk about agriculture. This is a nice little typo here. And you know what? I'll take you behind the scenes. Woohoo! Look at that. Oh, wow, I spelled it wrong. What a dope. Woohoo! Look at that. So we just talked about the abiotic components of soil, mainly weathering and also erosion. Now I want to talk about the biotic components of soil, mostly focusing on organic matter, not so much the actual organisms that are living in there. And the biotic components of soil, like organic matter, is going to come from the decomposition of fecal matter and from dead plants, animals, and fungi, right? And this is going to increase the nutrients in the soil. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, carbon. As these organisms decompose, all their nutrients, all their matter is going to get cycled back into the soil and made available for other organisms. We talked about this in the first unit. And over time, this decomposition will become or decomposition takes time, right? So as time goes on, there will be more and more decomposition, and there will be therefore more and more organics and nutrients in the soil. So as soil becomes more mature, it will become richer in terms of the nutrients and that are available for plants growing there. So young soils tend to be hard to survive in, and older soils tend to be much more appropriate for plants to live in. And that's why primary succession takes so long, because it requires soil formation. Okay, so I talked about the biotic and abiotic components of soil and where those come from. Now I want you to think a little bit about the factors that impact soil formation, and I've got them here in this nice little drawing. They are climate, organisms, the topography, the parent material, and the amount of time. So the climate, how sunny is it? How hot is it? How rainy is it, right? The amount of heat can impact the way that soil degrades, right, if it dries out very frequently. But more importantly, the precipitation can help weather the rock, and it can also help erode soil. The organisms that live in the soil are going to help cycle the nutrients, are going to help decompose living or biotic tissue that's in the soil, and they can also help, in some cases, break down rock as well. The topography of an area is going to matter as well. If you're on the side of a mountain that is receiving heavy winds and heavy rain, you're going to see faster soil formation than if you're on the dry side of the mountain. The parent material, that just refers to the rock that is being eroded and turned into soil. If it's a sedimentary rock, it's a lot softer than a metamorphic rock. And so a sedimentary rock is going to weather away a lot easier and a lot faster. And lastly, of course, time. The more time that goes by, the faster that, or the more soil can develop. Right? So all of these things are going to impact the soil formation, and there's more info on them in the book in, I want to say, I think it's chapter 12. I could tell you. Hold on. It's chapter 9. Chapter 9 is where you can read a little bit more about these. And as soil forms, it's going to form characteristic layers. Soil structure can be broken down into a bunch of different layers. Depending on which country you're in, they will use different layers, but we're going to focus on this layer. So the top layer is the O horizon. We refer to layers of soil as horizons. The top layer is the O horizon. That stands for organic. And this is the very, very topmost layer of soil. So anything that dies or falls from a tree is going to land, believe it or not, on the top of the ground. So we refer to all of that as organic matter. Dead leaves, dead animals, living animals, poop, etc. All that stuff is going to build up and form the organic layer. As this stuff starts to break down underneath, it starts to get like a little bit broken down. If you dig like an inch down, that's what we refer to as humus. Not hummus, humus. Don't confuse the two. Trust me, it will not end well for you. Beneath the O layer is the A horizon, and this is what we refer to as topsoil. This has some organic material, this has some minerals in it, some nutrients, and this is where when you plant plants, you're planting them in the topsoil. This is the good stuff. This is where we want to take care of this topsoil because our crops rely on it. The ecosystem is in there. The living creatures are in there. The plant roots are in there soaking up nutrients and water and stuff. Below that is the E horizon. This stands for alluviated. Basically what that means is this layer is it's kind of like topsoil and that it's all sorts of different types of sediment, but without any of the good stuff, meaning that there are no nutrients or organic matter. It's all been leached out. It's been sucked up into the layer above. So this layer is kind of like a ghost town, so to speak. Below that is the B horizon, known as subsoil. This is mostly just minerals, and below that is the C horizon, or which is the parent material, the rock that starts to break down, and then below that is bedrock. Don't worry so much about these bottom ones. The big ones you really want to focus on are these top two. You should memorize all of these, but I would be most familiar with the top two. And again, there's more information in the book at chapter 9 if you want to read a little bit more about each one. And the Wikipedia page for soil horizons is crazy detailed. Like, who needs to know that much? Somebody does. Okay, so you might be wondering, okay, how does the climate impact soil? We've been talking about climate all year, from everything from biomes to net primary productivity to biodiversity. How does the climate impact the soil? How is the soil going to vary as we go from biome to biome? Because soil isn't the same everywhere you go. And which biome is going to be the best for growing things? So ultimately what we see is that, unsurprisingly, things like the tundra and the desert don't have great soil for agriculture. They have low fertility. But somewhat surprisingly, the rainforest also has really low fertility. And let's walk through this. So the tundra is very cold. So decomposition happens very, very slowly there. There's also not a lot of organic matter. There aren't a lot of organisms. There aren't a lot of plants. So there's not a lot of organic matter to cycle back into the soil. Same kind of things that we see going on with the taiga or the boreal forest. It's just too cold for decomposition to be happening fast enough. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the rainforest, first of all, there's really high competition there. So any organic matter that does end up on the ground, those nutrients are very quickly going to get absorbed by any plants in the area. Second of all, there's so much rain and erosion happening in the rainforest that stuff doesn't stick around for long once it hits the ground. So it's actually pretty low in nutrients for that reason, and so it's not great for growing. Deserts, I hope, are kind of self-explanatory in terms of why they're low fertility. Meanwhile, high fertility ones are temperate forests and grasslands, which is a big chunk of the United States. These have just enough warmth and just enough precipitation to make decomposition happen fast enough, but not too fast, and limit the amount of erosion that is degrading the soil. Interestingly, there is a phenomenon called permafrost that we see in upper latitudes in the tundra and taiga biomes, where the top layers of soil will freeze over permanently. They're permanently frosted, permafrost. And you can see some pictures here of permafrost. It's pretty cool. What's not so cool is that permafrost has methane gas bubbles trapped inside of it. And methane is a greenhouse gas that is about 80 times more potent than CO2. Methane is what cows burp, and it's what you fart. It's what bacteria produce when they do anaerobic respiration. Methane is really bad, and it's extremely flammable, as you can see here. What's happening as the globe is warming is that the permafrost is melting, and it's no longer becoming permafrost. It's melting, and these gas bubbles are getting released into the atmosphere, which is exacerbating climate change. This is another positive feedback loop. The warmer it gets, the more methane gas bubbles are released, and the more methane gas bubbles are released, the worse climate change is going to get. So these positive feedback loops will keep popping up time and time again. But that's all I got for you today. If you've got questions on soil formation, please bring them to class. Otherwise, I will see you then.